Awesome. I want you to meet my friend, Tony Carmona. Tony is in his 60s today, but about 36 years ago in April of 1981, Tony was living in Denver, Colorado, and he and his wife, Linda, were in an apartment complex. And it had snowed recently, and snow was everywhere. It was really freezing cold. There was snow on their front deck. Tony, in his mid-20s, was a member of a Hispanic gang. Tony has been in and out of prison a number of times, and his body is covered in tattoos that he primarily received while he was in prison. He has 2 teardrops under one eye, which is not a good sign. Under his collar line is tattooed the number 13 and a half, which stands for 12 jurors, 1 judge, half a chance. Today, on the side of his neck, is tattooed the word psycho. By all accounts, this is somebody that if you ever walked and encountered on a street corner, you would want to divert your path away from him. So on this cold, winter, snowy night in Denver, Colorado, a knock came on the door of their home. Linda went to answer, and there was no one there. And as she was backing away, she heard this sound and looked down onto the ground. And laying in the snow was a 5-day-old baby boy in a diaper. Tony and Linda brought this child into their home. And I love this imagery of the badass Hispanic gang member and his wife taking this child in that did not belong to them, but falling in love with this child to raise this child as if it was their own. When Gordy was 5 years old, he had a grand mal seizure and went into the hospital. And after numerous tests over numerous days, they discovered that the damage to his brain was extensive and that he would probably never have a mentality that would exceed that of a 7-year-old. About 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Tony, Linda, and Gordy. Tony had recently been released from the penitentiary in Oklahoma, and somehow Linda and Gordy ended up in Austin, Texas. Serendipity had them meet at a church under the bridge at 7th and I-35. There was a pastor there named Dwayne Severance, and he discovered that Tony, Linda, and Gordy were living in a cardboard box somewhere near the intersection of Ben White Boulevard and Woodward. On the cold winter nights, Tony would go into a Walgreens, a CVS, a Walmart, an HEB, and he would steal toothpaste and then rifle as many newspapers as he could find out of the newspaper stands and come back to their cardboard home in the middle of the woods and lather their limbs in this toothpaste and then wrap them with the newspaper in order to be able to stay warm at night. That's how they lived 12 years ago. I was introduced to Tony and Linda and Gordy and fell in love with them right away. Was drawn in to the drama of the life of Tony, Linda, and Gordy. Was amazed that this badass, tattooed from head to toe, in and out of prison, Hispanic gang member had this ginormous heart that would allow him to take in a child and raise this child, even though this child was phenomenally mentally challenged. We went out and purchased a gently used recreational vehicle and lifted them up off the streets into a privately owned RV park. For the first several days, Gordy would wake up in the morning, pack everything into his little suitcase, go across the RV to Tony and Linda's room and say, "Mom, Dad, get up. We got to go." And they would look at Gordy and say, "No, Gordy, we're not at the Salvation Army. We don't have to get up and leave. We're not at a motel. This is our home." And it was difficult for Gordy to grasp this. Gordy and I became really good friends during this period of time. In fact, Gordy began to believe that he owned Mobile Loaves and Fishes, the organization that I founded. And so we had this dialogue going back and forth that he was the owner of Mobile Loaves and Fishes. And as part of my compensation package, I get to drive these awesome pickup trucks that've got the Mobile Loaves and Fishes logos all over them. And Gordy knew that those trucks belonged to him. And Gordy started asking me if I would teach him how to drive. And for 10 years, we had this dialogue that I was going to teach him how to drive, but I knew that that was a lie. One, he didn't have the mental capacity to learn how to drive. He didn't have the motor skills to learn how to drive. And he had these grand mal seizures that at any moment would drop him completely to the ground. In fact, his face was completely scarred in a Frankensteinian way, with scars over his lifetime of having these seizures, and whatever was in the way, he would hit, sutured up. On December 9th, 2014, he had one of these grand mal seizures while he was taking a bath, and he drowned. And it was devastating for us. It was devastating for the Mobile Loaves and Fishes family. It was devastating for Tony and Linda. My wife and I, Trish, arrived at their home. The place was covered with police, as it should be, investigating whether this was an accidental death or a homicide. The place was taped off. No one could get into their home. Linda had been traveling and was gone to visit family, but Tony was there. Tony at this time is now in his 60s. He's got one leg missing due to diabetes. He's old. He's no longer the badass Hispanic gang member that he once was. We were negotiating, trying to get Tony the opportunity to say goodbye to Gordy, but they wouldn't allow him in to give one last kiss to the man boy that he loved so dearly. When the coroner came out of the house with Gordy in the body bag on a stretcher, it was like a rocket ship. They were moving so fast. Tony erupted into emotion, and it took every ounce of energy that I and several police officers could do to hold him back. Gordy was cremated, and on the day that the ashes were ready, I get a phone call asking me if I could go to the funeral home, pick up Tony and Linda and take them to the funeral home to pick up the ashes. And fortunately, I was able to do that. When we arrived to the funeral home, the funeral director handed over the urn to Linda, and she just completely collapsed in guttural emotion. Tony was crying as well. I'm crying. I'm trying to figure out how to get him out of the funeral home, back into the truck. Finally, we're outside. I'm starting up the truck. Tony is sitting in the front seat of the truck. He's got the urn on his lap. He looks over at me and he goes, "Mr. Allen, would you let Gordy drive?" And he picks up this urn, moves it across the console, and sets it right on top of my lap. It was one of the most powerful memories of my life. Here we are, driving down Highway 183, with Gordy sitting on my lap, driving for the first time in his life. Tony and Linda and I are laughing, we're crying, we're going down memory lane, recounting the number of stories and the beauty that Gordy brought into our lives. It was extraordinary. In this human mosaic that we are all a part of, this beautiful imagery of a mosaic where each one of us are a tile or a pixel in that mosaic, we have become too accustomed in our culture of peeling off these tiles or darkening these pixels because somebody doesn't look right or somebody doesn't act right. And we throw those on the ground. And this beautiful imagery that we're creating that we call humanity is being destroyed because we are not willing to jump into people's lives that sometimes on the surface looked like they would present a problem for us. Our lives are composed entirely of stories and memories. I am recounting a story and a memory that happened years ago. Today, you and I are building stories and memories that in the future we're going to recount with our friends and our families. The stories and memories that we're going to be able to tell in the future are going to be impacted by what we do today. And in order to tell the greatest of stories, like the Tony, Linda, and Gordy story, we have to put our places in situations that might not be comfortable for us. We have to become friends with people that perhaps we might fear, like a badass Hispanic former gang member tattooed from head to toe with tattoos from prison. You and I have to break down these stereotypes that prevent us from actually caring about each other. The miracle of Mobile Loaves and Fishes and what we're doing out of the Community First Village is directly related to the number one corporate goal that we have, which is to break down the stereotypes that we have against other human beings, particularly the homeless. To dive into places that we would not normally go in order to discover the beauty of these little pixels, these little tiles in people that perhaps we would not normally encounter. We believe that one of the 8 characteristics of home are stories and memories that flow out of our homes. It's often said that the mortar that hold the bricks of even the most impoverished home are the stories and memories that flow out of that home. When you see the men and women that are standing on our street corners, when you see the men and women that are hovering around our shelters downtown, these are men and women that have experienced a profound, catastrophic loss of family. They lost the opportunity to tell rich, powerful, exciting stories. Their desire is to be welcomed back into the community, to open that door for them too to be able to build these stories and memories. So right there on that image is one of the greatest men I've ever met in my life, hugging the niche where Gordy is buried, out on the Community First property. Ladies and gentlemen, that man is Tony Carmona. And if you ever get to meet him, you will meet one extraordinary human being. Thank you very much.